1946. Harlem woke up to 6 bodies tied to a single truck on 96th Street. No trial, no witnesses stepping forward. Just one man's promise kept in the coldest way possible, Bumpy Johnson. Honoring the only brother he ever called family. How does loyalty become a death sentence written in rope and silence? September 12, 1946, 96th Street. Just after dawn. A black Dodge pickup sat motionless at the curb with the engine still warm and the headlights off. Behind it, 6 ropes pulled taut toward something the morning shift workers refused to look at directly. They walked past with their heads down, lunch pails gripped tight, shoes clicking faster than usual on pavement still wet from overnight rain. Mrs. Eleanor Vance opened her bakery at 5:45, like she had every morning since 1932. She turned the sign, unlocked the door, started the ovens. Through her window she could see the truck, could see the ropes, could see what happened when men decided the law moved too slow for justice. She pulled the shade down halfway. Not all the way, just enough to say she saw nothing while still watching everything. Across the street, Jimmy Costa leaned against the fire escape with a Lucky Strike burning down to his knuckles. He had been there since 3 in the morning, not because someone paid him to watch, but because in Harlem you learned which nights required witnesses and which nights required selective blindness. This was the second kind. He stubbed out the cigarette, lit another, did not move. The whisper started at the corner of Lenox and moved south like smoke from a trash fire nobody bothered to put out. 6. Just that word, passed from the newspaper vendor to the woman buying milk. From the milk woman to the janitor sweeping the synagogue steps. From the janitor to the cab driver waiting for a fare that would not come for another 20 minutes. No names. No details. Just the number, spoken quiet enough that it could be denied later if anyone official came asking questions nobody wanted to answer. By 6:15, the phone rang at the 28th Precinct. Desk Sergeant Morris took the call, wrote down the address, hung up, and stared at the notepad for 30 seconds before standing to find Captain Howard. They had a conversation that lasted less than a minute. Howard put on his coat slow, like a man walking toward something he wished he could postpone until after retirement. He did not call for backup, did not radio patrol cars, did not move with the urgency usually reserved for bodies found in daylight where civilians could see them. 2 squad cars arrived at 6:47. Officers Brennan and Williams stepped out first, stopped 10 feet from the truck, looked at each other with the expression cops wear when they know writing an honest report will end their careers. Captain Howard walked past them, circled the vehicle once, came back to the front, and said 3 words. Secure the scene. Nobody asked what that meant. It meant stand here, look official, keep people moving, and do not put anything in writing that a prosecutor could use to build a case nobody wanted built. The coroner showed up at 7:30 in a black Packard that smelled like formaldehyde and cigarettes. Doctor. Kenneth Marsh had been pulling bodies out of Harlem since before the war, had seen knife wounds and bullet holes, and men beaten so badly their own mothers could not identify them at the morgue. He looked at what was behind the truck, looked at Captain Howard, and said, "Time of death." Howard shrugged. "Sometime between midnight and now. Does it matter?" Marsh wrote something in his notebook that would later be transcribed as multiple blunt force trauma and approximate time 0300 hours, and other phrases designed to answer questions without providing information useful to anyone interested in solving crimes instead of filing them. By 8 o'clock, the truck and the ropes and everything attached to them were gone, loaded into the coroner's van, and driven to the city morgue on First Avenue where bodies waited in drawers for families who sometimes came and sometimes did not. The street was hosed down by a sanitation crew that did not ask why and did not get paid extra for working a scene usually reserved for homicide detectives with cameras and evidence bags. Mrs. Vance raised her shade back up. Jimmy Costa went inside to sleep. The newspaper vendor sold his stack by 9 without mentioning the biggest story of the day. Harlem moved forward the way it always did when the law and the streets agreed on different versions of the truth. There are cases open to find answers, and there are cases closed to maintain order. This one never made it past the second category. The report filed that afternoon was 4 sentences long, cited no witnesses, listed no suspects, concluded with the phrase "investigation ongoing," which meant investigation already over. Nobody called the families. Nobody knocked on doors asking what anyone saw. Nobody pretended this was the kind of thing you solved with evidence in courtrooms, because the city had already decided, not through votes or trials or speeches, but through the silence of 200 people who saw a truck and 6 ropes and understood exactly what it meant when someone crossed a line that Harlem drew in blood instead of ink. Red Hook, Brooklyn, March 1943. The docks smelled like wet timber, diesel fuel, and the kind of cheap tobacco men smoked when paychecks came weekly and disappeared faster. Willie Jackson walked the waterfront every morning at 5, hauling crates off cargo ships for 60 cents an hour, and a foreman who did not care if your back gave out as long as the freight kept moving. He was 24, built like someone who earned muscle through work instead of gymnasiums, with hands scarred from rope burn and splinters that never fully healed. He did not talk much, did not drink after shifts, did not gamble his pay at the card games that ran in the warehouse after the supervisors went home. He worked, collected his envelope on Friday, sent half to his mother in Virginia, kept the rest for rent and food and the kind of life that does not attract attention from men who profit off other people's desperation. March 17, 1943. Willie finished his shift at 6:30, walked toward the subway entrance on Columbia Street, and found 5 men waiting at the bottom of the stairs. They were not workers. You could tell by the shoes, polished leather instead of steel-toed boots, by the way they stood with hands in pockets like they owned the block and everyone walking on it. The one in front had a scar running from his left ear to his jawline, the kind of mark you get from a straight razor handled by someone who wanted you to remember the conversation. He stepped forward, blocking the stairs, and said, "You got a toll to pay if you want to use this exit." Willie stopped walking, kept his hands visible, kept his voice level. "I do not have money for tolls. I have money for rent and food. That is all." Scarface smiled without warmth. "Then maybe you pay a different way. Maybe you work for us instead of breaking your back for 60 cents while we make sure nobody breaks it worse." The other 4 moved closer, forming a half circle. One of them had a knife, not drawn but visible in his belt, a 4-inch blade with a bone handle worn smooth from use. Willie understood the situation clearly. These were not robbers looking for a quick score. They were recruiters for one of the crews that controlled the docks, the kind of men who decided which cargo got unloaded first and which Union stewards ended up in the East River wearing concrete boots. Saying no meant bleeding. Saying yes meant becoming the kind of person his mother prayed he would never turn into. He chose option 3. Willie's right hand came up fast, connected with Scarface's throat hard enough to drop him choking onto the pavement. The second man pulled his knife. Willie grabbed his wrist, twisted until bone cracked, and drove his knee into the man's stomach. The blade clattered onto the concrete. The other 3 hesitated, which is always fatal in a fight where numbers should win. That hesitation bought Willie 4 seconds. Not enough to run, not enough to win, just enough to make them angry instead of cautious. They came at him together, fists and boots and the sound of his ribs cracking under the weight of 3 bodies driving him into the brick wall. Blood filled his mouth. His vision narrowed. His knees buckled. Then 2 gunshots cracked through the air. Not aimed at anyone, just fired straight up into the March sky loud enough to freeze everyone mid-swing. Bumpy Johnson walked down Columbia Street like he was strolling through Central Park on a Sunday afternoon. A .38 revolver in his right hand and an expression that said violence bored him, but he would participate if necessary. He stopped 5 feet from the pile of bodies, looked at Willie bleeding against the wall, looked at the 5 men slowly backing away, and said in a voice quiet enough that it carried more weight than shouting, "From now on, he belongs to me." Nobody argued. Nobody asked questions. The 5 men scattered like roaches when the kitchen light comes on. Willie slid down the wall, sat on the pavement trying to breathe through broken ribs, and watched Bumpy holster the pistol without looking back. Bumpy did not offer a hand up, did not ask if Willie needed a hospital. Just said, "You work for me now. That means you eat. That means you live. That means when someone tries to kill you, they answer to more than just you." "Understand." Willie nodded once. Bumpy walked away. It was not recruitment. It was not charity. It was a contract signed in blood and silence. Willie traded his life for discipline, traded independence for protection, traded the docks for something darker but infinitely safer than dying alone at the bottom of subway stairs. In Harlem, family is not something you talk about. It is something you take responsibility for. And on March the 17th, 1943, Willie Jackson became Bumpy Johnson's responsibility, which meant he also became Harlem's problem if anyone decided to make him disappear. That reality kept him breathing for the next 3 years, right up until the night 6 men decided some rules did not apply to them. September 1943. Willie Jackson enlisted at the recruitment office on Whitehall Street because staying in New York meant working for Bumpy Johnson forever. And some part of him still believed there was a version of life where he answered to no one. The recruiter looked at his paperwork, saw a Negro marked in the race box, and said, "You will be in a segregated unit. You understand that?" Willie understood. He signed anyway. They sent him to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where the 92nd Infantry Division trained in desert heat that made Brooklyn feel like a vacation. The white officers treated them like expensive equipment that might break if handled wrong but was still just equipment. The black soldiers trained harder than anyone, knowing they would have to be twice as good to be considered half as capable. Willie learned to shoot, to march, to follow orders from men who would never follow orders from him. Italy, 1944. Gothic line. The Germans dug into mountains like ticks buried under skin, and the 92nd Infantry was ordered to root them out one hillside at a time. The artillery came first, shelling positions until the earth looked like the surface of the moon. Then the infantry advanced through mud and smoke and the kind of chaos that turns training into muscle memory, because thinking gets you killed. October 15th, 1944. Willie's platoon pushed toward a farmhouse outside of Massa. 23 men moving through an olive grove when the machine gun fire started. The sound was not like the movies. It was louder, sharper. The crack of bullets breaking the air faster than your brain could process. Men dropped. Some screamed. Some went silent immediately. Willie hit the ground, crawled behind a stone wall, tried to reload with hands shaking so badly he dropped the clip twice. Their lieutenant took a round through the chest, dead before he finished the order to fall back. The sergeant caught shrapnel in the leg, screaming for a medic who was already bleeding out 20 yards behind them. Willie looked around at 19 men still alive, leaderless, pinned down, and waiting for someone to make a decision. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The machine gun kept firing, chipping away at the stone wall, countdown to when the Germans would flank them and finish it. Willie made the call, not because he wanted to, not because he was trained for it, because waiting meant dying. And dying meant his mother got a telegram instead of a son. He pointed at 3 men, said, "Suppressing fire on my mark." Pointed at 4 more, said, "Flank left through the drainage ditch." Way pointed at the rest. Said, "We pushed straight through the center the second that machine gun reloads." It worked. Barely. The machine gun crew died. So did 7 more Americans. But 12 men made it to the farmhouse, held it until reinforcements arrived. And Willie got a Bronze Star pinned to his chest by a colonel who shook his hand without looking him in the eye. He came home in January 1946 with 3 medals, a duffel bag full of clothes that did not fit anymore, and the belief that maybe America would see him differently now. Maybe sacrifice earned respect. Maybe bloodshed for your country bought you a seat at the table instead of a spot at the back of the bus. He learned the truth at a diner in Philadelphia during the train ride back to New York. Willie walked in wearing his uniform, ribbons visible on his chest, sat at the counter, and ordered coffee. The waitress looked at him like he had asked her to spit in the cup. "We do not serve coloreds here. You can go around back if you want something to go." Willie did not argue, did not make a scene. He stood up, walked out, and understood with perfect clarity that the war he won overseas meant nothing to the war still being fought on American soil. The uniform did not protect him. The medals did not open doors. The Bronze Star did not buy him a cup of coffee in a country that sent him to die for freedoms it refused to grant. Harlem welcomed him back with honesty instead of parades. The men who fought came home to the same blocks, the same landlords, the same cops who cracked skulls for sport. The jobs did not improve. The respect did not materialize. The only thing that changed was Willie now knew how to kill efficiently, which made him valuable to exactly one person. Bumpy Johnson offered him work 3 days after he got back, not as muscle, as protection. Someone who understood tactics, who could read a room, who would not panic when bullets started flying. Willie said yes because the army taught him skills the civilian world did not want. And Harlem was the only place that saw war experience as a resume instead of a threat. Some men win wars on the battlefield, then lose them on the sidewalk. Willie Jackson won in Italy and came home to discover that victory does not transfer across borders, that courage does not translate into citizenship, that America builds monuments to soldiers while refusing to let them eat at the same lunch counters as the people they died protecting. He worked for Bumpy for 3 months, saved his life 3 times, and on the night 6 men broke into his apartment. Willie understood that the war never really ended. It just changed locations, traded uniforms for street clothes, and kept killing the same people it always had. Willie Jackson worked protection for Bumpy Johnson for exactly 3 months, February through April 1946, and in those 90 days he saved Bumpy's life 3 times. Not through intimidation, not through reputation, through the kind of vigilance that comes from war, where missing a detail means someone dies and it might be you. First time, March 8th, Small's Paradise on 7th Avenue. 2 in the morning, the jazz still playing, the whiskey still flowing. Bumpy sitting at his usual table with his back to the corner where nobody could come at him from behind. Willie stood 6 feet away, hands loose, eyes moving. A man in a gray suit walked to the bar, ordered bourbon, set the glass down too carefully. His hand trembled. Just a fraction. Most people would miss it. Willie did not miss anything anymore. The man's eyes flicked toward the door. Once. Twice. The 3rd time. His right hand started drifting toward his waistband. Willie moved before the motion finished, crossed the distance in 4 steps, grabbed the man's wrist, and slammed it against the bar hard enough that the small revolver clattered onto the wood. The music kept playing. Most people did not even look up. Bumpy took another sip of his drink, did not turn around, said quietly, "Get him out of here." Willie walked the man to the door, pushed him into the street, and came back to his position like nothing happened. Second time. March 22nd, outside a tenement on 139th Street. Bumpy meeting with a policy banker who owed 3 weeks of payments and needed reminding that debts do not disappear through avoidance. They stood on the sidewalk, talking numbers, when Willie saw the glint. Third-floor window across the street. Sunlight catching glass that should not be there because residential windows do not have scopes mounted on rifles. Willie did not shout a warning. Shouting wastes time. He grabbed Bumpy's shoulder and yanked him sideways half a second before the crack of the gunshot split the air. The bullet hit brick where Bumpy's head had been, sprayed dust and fragments across the sidewalk. Willie already had his own pistol out. Fired 3 rounds at the window. Did not hit anyone. Did not need to. The message was clear. You missed your shot. You do not get another. They found the rifle 2 hours later, abandoned on the fire escape. No prints, no witnesses. Just another reminder that running Harlem meant living with a target painted on your back in invisible ink that certain people could see perfectly. Third time. April 14th, the alley behind the Savoy Ballroom. Bumpy leaving through the back exit because walking out the front meant shaking 50 hands and answering 40 questions, and sometimes you just want to go home without performing for an audience. Willie walked 3 steps ahead, scanning the darkness, when 2 shapes detached from the shadows near the dumpsters. Both had guns already drawn, silencers threaded onto the barrels. Professionals who did this for money instead of passion. Willie did not think. Thinking is what gets you killed when the situation requires action in fractions of seconds. He launched himself forward, drove his shoulder into the first man's chest, sent him crashing into the brick wall. The silenced pistol fired, the sound like a cough, the bullet going wide into the alley wall. Willie's left hand caught the second shooter's wrist, twisted until the gun dropped, then drove his forehead into the man's nose with enough force to break cartilage and consciousness simultaneously. Bumpy watched both men collapse, stepped over them carefully to avoid getting blood on his shoes, and kept walking like Willie had just held a door open instead of preventing a double homicide. They did not discuss it, did not debrief, just got in the car and drove back to Edgecombe Avenue in silence. But that night, back at Bumpy's apartment, counting the day's receipts from the numbers runners, Bumpy looked at Willie longer than usual, not with gratitude. Gratitude is for people who think they deserve to be saved. This was assessment, calculation. The look a man gives when he realizes the person standing next to him is not just insurance, but the only reason he is still breathing. Bumpy set down his pen, leaned back in his chair, and said, "You do not stand next to me to scare people. You stand next to me to decide who stays alive." Willie nodded once. Bumpy went back to his ledger. The conversation was over. The understanding was permanent. Details of these incidents come from witness accounts and second-hand reports. The kind of stories that get told in barbershops and bars where nobody writes anything down but everyone remembers. The specifics might shift depending on who tells them. The outcome never changes. For 3 months, Willie Jackson was the reason Bumpy Johnson woke up every morning instead of getting zipped into a bag at the city morgue. And when 6 men came for Willie in the middle of the night, they were not just killing a bodyguard. They were dismantling the infrastructure that kept Harlem's most dangerous man alive. April 29, 1946. Dr. Raymond Holloway's office on Edgecombe Avenue. 3rd floor above a pharmacy that sold morphine under the counter to people who knew the right questions to ask. Willie sat on the examination table with his shirt off. Left shoulder wrapped in gauze, turning red from a knife wound that needed stitches, and probably antibiotics if such things were available to black men in Harlem who did not want police reports filed about how they got stabbed. Bumpy stood by the window smoking a cigarette, watching the street below, waiting for the morphine to do its job so Willie could sit still long enough for the doctor to sew him back together. The fight had been quick, stupid, the kind of territorial dispute that happens when someone from the Bronx decides to start collecting protection money on blocks that already have management. Willie put 3 men in the hospital. The 4th one got lucky with a blade. The morphine hit Willie's bloodstream like warm honey, smoothed the edges off the pain, loosened the muscles in his jaw that had been clenched since the stitching started. Doctor. Holloway worked with the efficient silence of a man who spent his career patching bullet holes and asking no questions that might require answers. Willie's head tilted back against the wall, eyes half closed, breathing deep and slow. Bumpy flicked ash out the window, said casually, "You could work somewhere safer. Numbers running. Collections. You do not have to stand in front of bullets." It was not really a question. More like checking if Willie understood he had options beyond being a human shield. Willie spoke without opening his eyes, voice thick from the morphine but clear enough. "I spent my whole life being treated like something temporary. Docs. I was just another body loading crates until my back gave out. Army. I was just another colored soldier they could throw at machine guns because losing us did not cost them anything important. Even my own family looked at me like I was passing through. Like I would leave or die or disappear and they would just fill the space with someone else." He opened his eyes, looked at Bumpy directly. "You are the first person who looked at me and saw someone worth keeping alive. Not because I am useful, because I matter. So yeah, I will stand in front of bullets. I will take knives. I will do whatever it takes to protect that because the second I lose it, I go back to being nobody that anyone claims." The room went quiet except for the sound of Dr. Holloway tying off the last stitch, cutting the thread, reaching for the bandage. Bumpy did not respond immediately, did not offer reassurance or sentiment, just turned back to the window, took another drag, let the smoke curl out into the April night. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making a contract instead of a promise. "Then, we understand each other. You keep me alive. I make sure Harlem knows you are not temporary. You are permanent. You are family. And anyone who comes for you comes for me." Willie nodded. "Doctor." Holloway finished the bandage, stepped back, said, "Keep it dry. Change the dressing daily. Come back in a week if infection starts." Willie pulled his shirt back on, buttoned it slowly, testing the range of motion in his shoulder. What happened in that room was not employment. It was not loyalty purchased with cash. It was a promise built on the kind of desperation that comes from spending your entire life being expendable and finally finding someone who treats you like you are worth the cost of protection. When power is built on promises like that, betraying it carries a price that courtrooms cannot calculate and laws cannot prosecute. Nobody can verify every word spoken in a closed room between 2 men and a doctor who made a career out of forgetting what he heard. What remains is the consequence. Willie walked out of that office more committed to Bumpy than most men are to their blood relatives. And 14 days later, when 6 men broke into his apartment, Willie's last words were not a plea for rescue. They were an apology for failing to keep the one promise that gave his life meaning. May 13, 1946. 3:47 a.m. Willie Jackson's apartment on West 144th Street. 3rd floor walk-up in a building where the landlord stopped fixing things in 1938 and the tenants stopped expecting him to care. The wooden stairs creaked under weight, a sound Willie's subconscious registered even through sleep, and the morphine haze from the shoulder wound that still hurt when he moved wrong. He woke to the creak, reached for the nightstand where he kept his service pistol, the .45 he brought back from Italy, cleaned and loaded and always within arm's reach. His hand found empty space. The drawer had been opened. The gun was gone. Someone had already been inside. already prepared the scene, already decided how this night would end. 6 men came through the door, not breaking it down, walking through it like they had a key, which meant someone gave them access, someone in the building who decided cooperation was cheaper than resistance. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before, spreading out to cover angles, blocking the window, making sure Willie understood there was no exit except through them. The first one spoke, Hell's Kitchen accent, the kind of voice that came from generations of dock workers and union enforcers who settled disputes with lead pipes and shallow graves. Bumpy Johnson thinks he runs Harlem. We are here to show him what happens when you protect the wrong people. They were not here to send a message. They were here to erase one. Willie was not just a target. He was a symbol. And symbols only work until someone publicly destroys them. Willie tried to stand. His shoulder screamed. The morphine made his balance unreliable. 2 of them grabbed him before he made it upright, slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster, drove a fist into his ribs where the knife wound was still healing. He tasted blood, copper thick on his tongue, vision narrowing to a tunnel. One of them picked up Willie's bronze star from the dresser, the medal he kept in a wooden box because displaying it felt like bragging about something that did not matter to anyone who mattered. The man turned it over in his hands, smiled without warmth, said, "They gave you this for killing Germans. Too bad it does not work on Americans." He dropped it on the floor, stepped on it, ground his heel into the metal until the ribbon tore. They worked him over with methodical patience, not rage, not passion, just the kind of violence professionals deliver when the goal is suffering instead of speed. Fists, boots, a broken chair leg that connected with Willie's knee and sent white-hot pain shooting up his leg. He fought back when he could, caught one of them with an elbow that broke something in his face. But 6 against 1 with a wounded shoulder and no weapon is mathematics that always ends the same way. Willie's vision blurred. His breathing came shallow and wet, which meant ribs were broken and possibly puncturing something internal. He understood how this finished, not with a gunshot. Too loud. Too quick. They would beat him until he stopped moving, then stage it to look like a robbery. Another dead black man in Harlem that the police would file under unsolved and forget before lunch. The largest one crouched down, grabbed Willie's jaw, forced eye contact. "You got anything to say before we finish this?" Willie's mouth filled with blood. He spat it onto the floor, forced words through broken teeth and a split lip. Not a plea. Not a curse. Just a message for the only person who would understand what it meant. "Tell him I am sorry." The man frowned, confused. "Sorry for what?" Willie closed his eyes. "That I did not see them coming." They finished it in the next 90 seconds. Details of what happened in that room come through layers of witness testimony. Coroner reports written in language designed to obscure instead of clarify. And the silence of 6 men who walked out at 4:15 a.m. and disappeared into the kind of darkness that protects people when the law decides not to look too closely. What does not change across any version is the outcome. By dawn, Willie Jackson was gone, and Bumpy Johnson woke up to the news that someone had just declared war using the life of the only man he ever called brother as the opening shot. May 13th, 1946. 6:17 a.m. The phone rang in Bumpy Johnson's apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. The kind of call that comes before sunrise because the person on the other end knows waiting only makes the wound deeper. Bumpy lifted the receiver, listened for 43 seconds without speaking, said "Where?" then hung up before the answer finished. He did not slam the phone down, did not curse, did not put his fist through the plaster wall the way men do when rage needs an exit. He walked to his desk, pulled open the bottom drawer. and removed a black leather notebook that looked identical to his business ledgers, except the debts recorded in this one could not be paid in cash. Illinois Gordon arrived at 7:15 carrying a manila folder thick enough to break a nose if you swung it hard. Illinois was 54, had been collecting information in Harlem since before Bumpy understood that knowledge kills more efficiently than bullets. Ran a network of janitors and bartenders and taxi drivers who remembered faces and forgot nothing. He set the folder on Bumpy's desk without ceremony, without condolences, without asking questions that already had answers. Just paper and silence. Bumpy opened it. 6 photographs paper-clipped to 6 pages of handwritten notes in Illinois' cramped script. Names, addresses, the bars where they drank, the women they paid for, the routes they drove home when they thought nobody was counting their heartbeats. Angelo Fontana, 32. Scar on his left hand from a warehouse fire in 41. Mickey Caruso, 29. Drives a green Buick with a dent in the rear fender. Paulie DeMarco, 35. Plays poker every Thursday and loses more than he wins. Frank Russo, 27. Has a girlfriend in Chelsea who does not know what he does for money. Tommy Benedetto, 31. Owes $300 to a bookie in the Bronx. Sal Genovese, 26. Wears the same gray jacket in every photograph like a man who owns 2 suits and saves one for funerals. All of them from Hell's Kitchen. All of them connected to the Irish crews trying to push into Harlem with gasoline and baseball bats. Treating the neighborhood like territory you claim through volume instead of respect. One location appeared in every file. Callahan's Tavern on 10th Avenue between 48th and 49th, where they gathered Thursday nights to drink Jameson and count money and laugh about the week's work, like men who believed violence made them bulletproof. Bumpy spread the pages across his desk, the way a surgeon lays out instruments before an operation. He did not gather his crew for speeches, did not call meetings to discuss strategy or vote on decisions. He picked up the phone, made 4 calls, each one lasting less than 2 minutes, each one assigning a single task without explaining how the pieces connected. First call. I need a truck, black Dodge or Ford, engine quiet enough for residential streets, registration clean enough to pass inspection, dirty enough that nobody tracks the paperwork back to anyone breathing. Thursday noon, garage on 145th. The voice on the other end said, "Done," and hung up. Second call. 6 lengths of rope, 3/4-inch manila, strong enough to pull an engine block, no fraying, no weak spots. I do not want anything snapping at the wrong moment. Silence. Then, how long? Bumpy looked at the notebook where he had already done the math. 30 feet each. Delivered Wednesday. Third call. Thursday night. 10th Avenue, 48th to 49th. I need eyes on every exit within 3 blocks. Anyone tries to leave that zone after 11 pisas boom. You slow them down. Flat tire. Fender bender. Ask for directions. I do not care. Nothing violent. Just delay. The man on the other end had been doing this work since Prohibition made millionaires out of people willing to ignore laws written by men who never missed a meal. He said, 15-minute window, Bumpy said. 30. Fourth call. This one to a precinct captain whose mortgage payments came from an account Bumpy had been feeding for 6 years. Deposits made every month like clockwork. Insurance against nights exactly like this one. I need the route from 10th Avenue to 96th Street clear. No patrol cars, no traffic stops, no cop deciding to be a hero. Thursday, 11:30 to midnight. Captain Howard's voice came back tired, resigned. The sound a man makes when he stops pretending the paycheck he collects is the one that matters. It will cost extra, Bumpy said. It always does. And hung up. He closed the folder, looked at Illinois standing by the window, smoking a cigarette that filled the room with smoke that smelled like burned rope. This is not about revenge. Revenge is fast, loud, satisfying for 10 seconds until you realize you still have the same enemies, plus new problems involving detectives who actually care. Illinois nodded, flicked ash into a tray already overflowing. So what is it about? Bumpy stood, walked to the window, looked down at 7th Avenue waking up to Friday morning. Vendors opening fruit stands, women walking to factory jobs, children heading to schools that taught them reading and math, but nothing about the kind of equations that balance tonight. It is about making sure every crew from Brooklyn to the Bronx understands the price. You can sell on my blocks if you pay the tax. You can run numbers if you kick up a percentage. You can do business, but you cannot touch my family. And if you do, what happens next will not be a fight. It will be a lesson. Illinois crushed his cigarette, lit another, and the 6 names in that folder, Bumpy, did not turn from the window. They are not the lesson. They are the textbook. The plan moved forward like a machine built from precision parts. The truck arrived Thursday noon, odometer showing 60,000 miles. Paint job, flat black that did not reflect streetlights. The rope came Wednesday in a canvas bag. Tested by a man who used to rig cargo nets on merchant ships before the war. Each strand rated for 1,200 pounds of tension. Spliced ends wrapped tight enough to hold under weight most men could not imagine. Thursday, May 16th. The surveillance team took positions at 10 a.m. 3 cars parked on cross streets with clear sight lines to every exit from Callahan's Tavern. Men with newspapers and thermoses of coffee, watching without appearing to watch. The kind of work that requires patience most people mistake for doing nothing. The patrol route was adjusted through channels that did not require written orders, just understanding between men who knew which envelopes bought which favors. Bumpy did not make speeches about loyalty or brotherhood, did not invoke Willie's name like a battle cry. He laid out the plan the same way he organized collection routes for numbers runners, with efficiency that eliminated waste and clarity that prevented mistakes. A bomb makes noise. A fire draws cameras. A shooting starts investigations. But a lesson delivered correctly does not need explanation because everyone who sees it understands the language without translation. Motivation can only be inferred from actions. Intent can only be measured by outcome. What happened next was both, executed with the cold precision of men who understood that power built on fear collapses when someone stops being afraid. But power built on certainty, on the absolute knowledge that crossing specific lines produces specific consequences, that power survives generations. Thursday, May 16th, 1946, 11:19 p. Assam. Callahan's Tavern sat on 10th Avenue like a rotting tooth in a mouth that stopped caring about appearances sometime during the first Roosevelt administration. The door had a lock that looked functional until you tested it, a bolt that did not catch, a striker plate bent from years of men shouldering through after too many drinks. Nobody fixed it because Callahan's was not the kind of establishment that worried about uninvited guests. The men who drank there were the ones other people locked doors against. Inside, Angelo Fontana dealt 5-card stud at a table scarred with cigarette burns and carved initials from men who thought immortality came from knifing their names into wood. 6 players. The same 6 who walked into Willie Jackson's apartment 96 hours ago, believing violence was a skill that bought immunity. They drank Jameson straight, smoked Pall Malls down to the filter, counted money in stacks held together with rubber bands that had lost their tension years ago. The conversation was loud, vulgar, the kind of talk men have when they believe the world operates on rules they wrote. 11:21 p.m. The door opened, not kicked, not shattered, just pushed. The broken lock offering no resistance. the hinges creaking the way metal does when nobody oils them. 4 men walked through, moving with the unhurried confidence of people executing a plan they had rehearsed until every step became automatic. They carried revolvers but did not fire them, did not shout warnings, did not announce themselves. Surprise handles most situations before bullets become necessary. 87 seconds. That is how long it took to control 6 men who controlled rooms through intimidation and the threat of broken bones. Chairs kicked backward, arms twisted behind spines until shoulders screamed. Pistols pressed against kidneys hard enough to make breathing a conscious effort. Angelo tried to stand, caught a fist in his solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, choking for air that would not come. Mickey reached for the .38 in his waistband, had his wrist broken with a sound like green wood snapping before his fingers touched metal. The others froze, understanding through animal instinct that resistance cost pieces they preferred to keep attached. Bumpy Johnson walked in last, hands in his coat pockets, face carrying the expression of a man reading a grocery list. He did not pull a weapon, did not raise his voice, did not perform rage or grief or any emotion that required an audience. Just walked to the center of the room, stopped, looked at each face the way you look at addresses on envelopes you are about to mail, memorizing details that will matter later. He crouched in front of Angelo, eye level, close enough that Angelo could smell the Barolo on Bumpy's breath from dinner 3 hours ago. You came into my home. You killed my brother. You thought that would teach me fear. His voice was quiet, conversational, the tone you use explaining directions to someone lost. You taught me something, just not what you intended. He stood, walked to the door, said over his shoulder without looking back, "Bring them." The black Dodge pickup idled outside, engine running smooth, headlights off, parked at the curb like it belonged there. 6 lengths of rope lay coiled in the truck bed, each one measured to 30 feet. Each one tested that afternoon by a man who understood tension and weight and the mathematics of load-bearing. The process was methodical, not theatrical, not designed for spectacle, just efficient application of materials for a purpose that required precision. Hands bound with cord that bit into wrists, ropes secured to the modified rear axle, reinforced that morning by a welder who asked no questions and remembered no faces. Bumpy climbed into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, checked the gas gauge showing 3/4 full, more than enough for the route already planned. He did not look back, did not deliver speeches, did not explain justice or retribution or any of the words people use to make violence sound like philosophy. He put the truck in gear, pulled away from the curb, and drove south on 10th Avenue at 17 miles per hour. Slow enough that the engine did not strain. Fast enough that stopping was not an option for anyone connected to what followed behind. The route had been cleared. No patrol cars, no beat cops, no traffic lights that would turn red at inconvenient moments. Just empty streets and windows that stayed dark, and people who heard engines but decided hearing nothing was safer. At 11:47 p.m., the truck turned east on 96th Street, drove exactly 2 blocks, and stopped at the location where Willie Jackson's body had been found 4 days earlier in an alley that smelled like rotting vegetables and piss. Bumpy shut off the engine, climbed out, walked to the back of the truck with footsteps that echoed off brick walls. He stood there looking at 6 ropes pulled taut, looking at the street where his brother died alone because 6 men decided one life did not matter. He did not speak to them, did not spit, did not perform satisfaction or completion. Just stood there the way you stand at a gravesite when words are insufficient and silence is the only honest response. Then he said, quiet enough that the words barely traveled past his own ears, "You wanted to make one man an example, Tonight I made 6 men a law. He got back in the truck, started the engine, drove north on Amsterdam Avenue toward Harlem, where business waited and life continued. Left the ropes where they were. By midnight, the scene was already being documented by men who wrote reports designed to say everything while revealing nothing. Details of this night exist through witness testimony, filtered through years of selective memory. Police reports written in language that obscures instead of clarifies. And the silence of everyone who saw something but decided amnesia was safer than honesty. Specific facts cannot be fully verified. The sequence remains consistent across every source. The outcome never changes. May 17, 1946. 7:34 Captain Howard of the 28th Precinct filed his official report in handwriting that looked like it had been practiced to achieve maximum illegibility. 6 bodies discovered on 96th Street at approximately 0600 hours. Cause of death pending autopsy. No witnesses have come forward. Investigation ongoing. 4 sentences, 53 words, 7 minutes to write, 3 minutes to file. The rest of his career to pretend he believed it. By 8:15, the news moved through Harlem faster than telegrams, faster than phone calls, faster than any official channel designed to disseminate information to people who needed to know. The newspaper vendor on Lenox Avenue told the woman buying milk. The woman told the janitor sweeping the church steps. The janitor told the cab driver waiting for a fare that would not come for another 20 minutes. 6. 1 truck. 96th Street. The details did not require explanation. The mathematics were simple enough that everyone could do the calculation without paper. The other crews received the message without anyone sending it. By noon. Friday. The Irish syndicate operating out of Hell's Kitchen sent word through a bartender who worked enough establishments to serve as neutral territory that they were pulling all operations out of Harlem immediately. No negotiation required, no counteroffers entertained. Just gone like smoke when the wind changes. The Italians from the Bronx who had been measuring profit margins on policy rackets quietly decided the percentages did not justify the risk. A crew from Brooklyn that had been collecting protection money from grocery stores on 8th Avenue suddenly found business opportunities elsewhere that required their full attention. The response was not fear. Fear fades when the immediate threat passes, when memory softens details, when distance makes consequences seem theoretical instead of inevitable. This was calculation, cold assessment conducted by men who understood that some territories are held not through superior firepower, but through demonstrated willingness to make examples so permanent that future generations inherit the lesson before they are old enough to understand the language. Harlem was not worth dying for. More specifically, Harlem was not worth dying slowly, for tied to the back of a truck, dragged through streets where people watched from windows but nobody called police who would arrive too late to matter. Bumpy Johnson owned Harlem not because he had more guns or more men or more money. He owned it because he had proven, publicly, irreversibly, that crossing specific lines produced specific outcomes, and those outcomes were worse than any profit margin could justify. May 19, 1946. Willie Jackson's funeral. Small Baptist church on 138th Street. Pews filled beyond capacity. 200 bodies pressed into space designed for half that number. Standing room only along the walls where paint peeled in strips and the ceiling leaked when it rained. The service was quiet, dignified, absent the performative grief that happens when people need witnesses to prove they cared. His mother sat front row, flown up from Virginia on a ticket Bumpy paid for, wearing black wool despite the May heat, holding a handkerchief that stayed folded because some grief goes too deep for tears that strangers can see. Bumpy stood in the back near the door, did not sit, did not approach the casket, did not join the line of people offering condolence in phrases worn smooth from overuse. When the service ended, when the crowd filed out into sunlight that seemed too bright for a day that should have been overcast, Bumpy walked to the front alone. The church was empty except for the pastor counting hymn books and pretending not to notice. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out Willie's bronze star. The metal recovered from the apartment floor where it had been stepped on and bent by men who thought metal could be humiliated. The ribbon was torn. The bronze was scratched. But the weight was the same. Still heavy enough to mean something to people who understood what it cost to earn. Bumpy set it on the casket lid, not at the center where it would be ceremonial, but slightly to the left where Willie would have worn it if he ever pinned it to his uniform. Which he never did because displaying it felt like asking for recognition he knew would not come. Bumpy did not say a prayer, did not apologize, did not explain or justify or ask forgiveness from God, or Willie or the mother sitting in the basement fellowship hall drinking coffee someone handed her because people need something to do with their hands when words fail. He just placed the medal down with the care you use handling objects that cannot be replaced. Then walked out, got into a black Packard idling at the curb, and drove back to Edgecombe Avenue where ledgers waited and business continued because stopping meant everything. Willie died for became meaningless. Power is not the sound of gunshots. Power is not the number of bodies you can stack or the territory you can claim or the fear you can generate in people too weak to fight back. Power is the ability to make an entire city understand new rules without needing to write them down, without needing to explain them, without needing to enforce them through daily violence because the enforcement already happened and everyone saw it and everyone remembers. After May 16, 1946, Harlem operated under revised parameters. You could sell heroin on Bumpy's blocks if you paid the tax and kept the junkies from dying in doorways where children walked to school. You could run numbers if you kicked up 15% and did not shortchange the players who bet their grocery money on three-digit dreams. You could operate brothels, loan sharking, truck hijacking, any enterprise that generated revenue. But you could not touch his people, could not harm his family, could not cross that line without accepting that the response would be measured not in bullets, but in lessons that would echo for decades. The police never solved the case. The investigation remained technically open in the sense that the file existed in a cabinet on the 4th floor of the precinct house, gathering dust alongside hundreds of other files that would never be reviewed by anyone interested in justice instead of paperwork completion. The witnesses who saw the truck, who heard the engine, who looked through curtains and made the conscious decision to see nothing, never came forward, never gave statements, never identified anyone in lineups that were never conducted. The bartender at Callahan's Tavern reported a broken lock but no robbery, no missing liquor, no evidence of crime beyond property damage that would cost $12 to repair. The coroner ruled cause of death as multiple traumatic injuries consistent with, and left the sentence incomplete because finishing it required honesty that nobody wanted preserved in official records that might someday be subpoenaed by prosecutors who had not yet learned which cases to avoid. Harlem moved forward, not because people forgot. Forgetting would have defeated the purpose. People remembered, which was the entire point. Every crew that considered expanding operations into the neighborhood had to answer one question first, and that question was not about profit margins or market share or competitive advantage. The question was simple. Is what we stand to gain worth becoming the next textbook example? Most of them decided it was not. The ones who decided wrong learned the same lesson 6 men from Hell's Kitchen learned on a Thursday night when Bumpy Johnson kept a promise written in rope and silence, and the kind of certainty that does not require explanation. History records consequences. Documents survive. Witnesses die, but their testimony gets passed down through generations like inherited silverware, polished and preserved and brought out when the story needs telling. What happened on 96th Street became part of Harlem's institutional memory. the kind of knowledge that shapes behavior without anyone needing to reference it directly. You do not touch Bumpy's family. That rule did not need to be written in contracts or shouted in meetings or enforced through daily violence. It existed the way gravity exists, invisible but absolute, pulling everything toward consequences that had already been demonstrated with sufficient clarity that repetition was unnecessary. Where justice ends and retribution begins is a line thinner than most people want to admit. The law has one answer, the street has another. And on May 16, 1946, those two answers diverged completely, creating a space where Bumpy Johnson operated according to rules that courtrooms do not recognize but everyone in Harlem understood perfectly. The viewer decides which answer matters more. Harlem woke up on May 17, 1946, and moved forward without forgetting. Not through fear, through understanding. The crews from Brooklyn never returned. The Irish from Hell's Kitchen rerouted their operations north. The Italians sent word through intermediaries that territorial boundaries would be respected indefinitely. Willie Jackson's name was not spoken often after that, not because people forgot, because remembering did not require repetition. His bronze star sat in Bumpy's desk drawer, next to the black notebook where certain debts were recorded. Bumpy never visited the grave. Willie did not need apologies. He needed the promise kept. By 1947, new crews arrived in Harlem with ambition and guns. The older men would pull them aside. Tell them just enough. 6 men, 1 truck, 96th Street. The young men would nod, understanding that some lines exist not to be tested, but to be respected. If you want more stories New York tried to bury, hit subscribe. And tell me when the system fails to protect you. What choice remains? Where does justice end and retribution begin? Drop your answer below, because this question is still being asked in cities across America today.